Tonight, unfortunately, we're not doing a whole lot on the mock-up and that because it's fences and driveways and such. So most of it will be you having to listen to me. So we'll see where that goes. Most of the time, I touch on a little bit of landscaping in this, as you see on the breakdown of it, and that's usually directly related to your decks, fences, sidewalks, and orientation to them on your property, as well as proper grading from your house away from them so that you don't run counter water in your basement or water lying around where it shouldn't be. The biggest portion of this is planning for your yard. If you're going to do a garage or going to do a sidewalk or looking to do a fence, do you know where your property lines are? If you're going to be digging fence posts, make certain you've got the proper clearances from Manitoba Hydro, the gas company, cable, because if you dig something up and you didn't get those clearances, it's on you to fix them. And believe you me, if you drill through something like a gas line and that, which we have, can cost you many thousands of dollars, which it did.
So when you're reading that, they have all these numbers online. Can you just phone them up
Yes.
and tell them?
Tell them what your address is, what you're doing. And usually what I try and do is, if it's something like a fence you're going to be doing, do a site plan of the proposal for the fence so that when the people come to do it, and what I've done in a lot of instances is I mark where all the holes are going to be dug. Little piece of red flag on a nail, stick it in the dirt, measure them out, so you know exactly where everything is going to be for the orientation of your posts.
If you were putting new posts where old posts used to be.
You should call before you dig, because quite likely the old post isn't deep enough in the ground, and your fence is probably doing this, or it's rotted off and you're going to have to dig past where it is. My rule of thumb when you're putting fences in is that you should have a third below grade of whatever's going to be sticking above grade. On my fence at home, I have close to 4 feet in the ground because I have 6 feet up. Fences can be done with many different materials. Things like chain link, for instance, is a metal post. They can drive those in the ground. They don't have to be dug in. But there again, you should get clearances before you do something like that. You'll find that a chain link fence doesn't require it be that deep in the ground because the wind goes through them. If it's a fence like mine, I use colored sheet metal. Same as what you would put on the side of a building. I put that up as a fence because it's zero maintenance. I don't ever have to paint it. Nobody can see through it.
Is that hard to put up?
No. And you'll find the cost of it is exactly the same, if not less, than if you wanted to put up a board fence. I went halves with the neighbor to the north of me on a fence. She wanted cedar pickets on her side of the fence. I went out and in about an hour and a half, my brother-in-law and I did 60 feet of fence down her side with all the sheet metal fastened in place. On my side, I kept the good neighbor's side on my side so that she could put on her side. She split the cost of the frame and the posts with me. So I paid for the material on my side, she paid for the material. And when we compared it after, the boards, they showed up from the lumber yard, and probably a quarter of them she had to send back because they were so warped and twisted and crooked that she couldn't even get them to sit properly on the framework. In the end, when we priced it in that, she was $68 more than if we'd have done it with the sheet metal. And it took her by herself a little over a week to go down one side to cut everything and fit it properly. So there are payoffs to it. And it's aesthetics, it's whatever you want to look like. A little short picket fence isn't going to be near the costs. But if it's a solid board fence that you want to put up, it will cost a fair bit. The biggest reason I say planning it out, if you don't want to do it, you can go to a lumber yard and have them do it for you. They'll do a layout for a fence or a deck and such at a lot of lumber yards. They have programs that they can punch in the lineal footage of it and what you're going to put in it for a fence. If it's, say, a batten board where the boards are oriented, you put a board on like this. There's a space between each one. And then they put a board over top of this one. That's a batten board. Then you can't see through it. That allows one board to shrink more than the other. There's a little bit of work to doing them like this because you have to properly space them, but your coverage of the board going over the other ones, once they've shrunk down, and believe you me, they will shrink down. Moisture content in most of this lumber used to come in around 22%. Anything that's treated in that, I'd say, has got 40% in it for water. I've taken the cedar tone boards that most people build fences out, butt them tight, because some people say, oh, I want to see a gap in it. Don't worry about it, it'll be there next year. My niece's fence, we put up, butted all the boards tight, and in the next spring we had 1/4 to 1/2 inch gaps between every board. And some of them will be quite a bit. What I've had to do in some instances when people phone back, you have to go out and undo all the boards and then tighten them all back up to the point where you can add 1 or 2 boards to a long run. And that's why I say if you want them spaced, when you initially put them in, butt them tight, because they will shrink down. Years ago, you used to be able to use like a carpenter's pencil the one way and put them between, and it never bothered. But nowadays, with moisture content in your materials, it's quite common for them to shrink down. If you're putting the fence in and that, try not to span more than an 8-foot span between sections. You'll end up with a few extra posts in a fence, but it's a lot stabler fence. I'm a little bit of a person who thinks overkill on it as opposed to under. I've seen people put a single stringer on the top and bottom and put the pickets all in. The next year on the fence, everything's like this because the boards have cupped, twisted, and warped. So you end up having to flip boards or replace ones in the fence. I have a tendency when I put a fence up, I'll put one at the top, one at the bottom, and one center. That way the boards can't do this against each other. The top ones I'll run on the flat, so the 2x4, if say this is your post, and this is your post. This one I put in on the flat. This one runs this way, and this one goes on the flat facing me. And then I put a 2x6 up across the top, so you end up basically with a 2x4 sitting like this, and a 2x6 cap on the top. So your pickets then go here. And then you have the one in the center, like this, which is this way, has strength this direction. When I put the 2x6 on the top, it's fastened with screws into this, and then your posts would be right here. And then on the bottom, there again, this one's like that. You fasten here, here, and here. There's very little chance that that board is ever going to move on you, and it will stay that way for probably as long as you or I are around. If you're going to use, like I use the sheet metal, I still put this in the center. Keeps the sheet metal from vibrating, and you don't end up with where someone can actually come up against it in the alley and push or something, or give it a kick and bend it easily. It can be dented in that, but it's a good alternative to a fence that you always have to paint.
I have neighbors that I really want to not see them on here. As I'm worried about it, because I've got the posts already, I haven't put in, I bought the posts.
Yeah,
But then it was kind of like, you know, how do I make it so it's solid? So sheet metal is something I have kind of looked at. But,
and it's very easy to work with once you've figured it out there. It goes up quickly.
and then it's solid too, then, so that I don't have to.
And if you go to the lumber yard and tell them that that this distance from here to say here is 5'6", all those panels will come 5'6". You don't have to cut them. You determine what length they're required for the fence, and you get them, and they show up as a stack of them all cut to length. And that's the one nice thing with sheet metal. It's used in a lot of commercial applications around parking lots and such because of the fact that it's clean, maintenance-free, and you can get it in a myriad of colors. Most lumber yards have a palette of about 8 or 10 colors that are fairly standard. What I've used is browns, greens, and I actually put a blue fence up for a guy once. So you get them, the screws are colored to them sheet metal. Always buy about 5% extra screws. Never seem, I put sheet metal on buildings for years and always seem to end up having to buy extra screws.
And so you get the colored screws like at the lumber yard.
The lumber yard,
And then the you buy the blue screws to go with it.
the screws come with the washers on them and they're colored, the heads of them are colored.
So what about wind resistance?
Pardon?
What about wind resistance?
That's why I say a third below grade for whatever's above. So I always think bare minimum of what you're burying in the ground should be 3 foot.
Yeah, like I got 9.5 foot.
Yeah. So you,
Fence.
and what I do is I'll put the posts in. I don't worry about the height. And then what I do is pull a line from front to back, mark them on the posts, and then trim the tops so the tops are all exactly the same. And that way then you can run a 2x6 on the flat between them. And if you do them in 8-foot sections, you're spanning 3 posts every time. And it keeps the fence a lot more rigid. It's less apt to start this. And that's why if you keep at least 3 to 4 feet in the ground, and when you put it on, you can go as high as a 6-foot fence, and the wind will never move it. Wind shear here is probably the worst enemy of fences. I don't know how many times I've seen people put fences in and they're leaning one way or the other and that, and it's usually because they've not put enough in the ground. And make certain that you're tamping the posts well around them. I always put crushed rock around the posts. That way then the water drains away from them. The water isn't held right by the posts.
You don't put cement?
So I was thinking cement.
A lot of people put concrete, or now they've got a product that's like a 2-component foam. You break the bag in the hole, and
They've used that from work and they said it's awesome.
it works well, but I always find anything. Have you ever seen something that's been encapsulated in concrete and then it's rotted? It's usually rotted exactly the size, and if the concrete isn't worked, that it's sloped away from the post and stuff, a lot of guys just throw it in the hole and then dump some dirt on top of them. But I found the crushed rock bites to the post and allows you drainage that the moisture will get away from the post, and a treated post will last, the lifetime of it will be longer.
So you just put the post in a hole and hold it there, there's nothing else holding it in, and put all the crushed rocks
And tamp around it.
press down.
So what you do is, most of the time you would drill like an 8 or 10 inch hole, and then you would have your post that would be in the center of the hole. I always have I put a post at each end, get it centered to where the property line is going to be. If you're splitting the fence with your neighbors, I straddle the property line. That way then, but if you're paying for it 100%, sneak it, say 2 inches or something onto your property. That way the neighbor can never complain about, it's your fence, it's on your property. If it's one of those things where I've been pretty fortunate, I've got neighbors on either side that were willing to split the cost of the material down each side. So it helps you offset the costs of it. I get the material broke down in the material for this side on one bill, to the alleyway on one bill, and down the other. So that way you can go to the neighbor, this is what it cost. And then you just split the cost. If you're doing it yourself, keep it just inside of the property line. That way the neighbor, the girl that lives to the north of me, originally she says to me, there's trees about this big around down the property line. She says, well, I don't care, put the fence just on my side, I don't care if I lose this much of my yard. I said, but the problem being is 10 years from now or whatever, when you sell the property and they go to do the survey for it and the neighbor comes to me and says, move your fence, there's 2 feet of my property that's in your yard. So I don't ever want to be put in that position. So she couldn't afford it, but I paid to have the trees taken out. Of course, I took a bunch of it. A friend of mine came and took them down for me at a cost, and then I had them hauled away myself. That way, then I could put right down the property line. It's an additional cost, but in the end, it makes for better neighbors, I think. If you put the post in the hole, though, take the post and tamp the bottom of the hole with the post, and then get it centered to where you want it. If you're going to run a string line, you would put a post at this end of the property and at this end. And if the post is squared like that, the string would run down one side. So all the rest of your posts, as the holes are here, you would set the post in so that it's like this. That way you've got one side on all the posts that are dead in line. Once you get to that point, get someone to help you, or you can do it yourself. I've done lots of them. It's simpler sometimes if you get someone to hold it with a level to the line. My level, I have a little rubber band thing that snaps around the post and the level stays on the post. You can buy levels now that have got 2 sides and they fit on a post and a clip and they hold them there, and it has a bubble. So if you hold the post and then just start, I dump a bunch of crushed rock around here and here and just keep kicking it with my feet, and I use an old 2x2 or a metal bar with a plate on the end of it and just start filling it with aggregate up each side and tamping it. And tamp it all the way up to within this area here with crushed rock. Then you can top it off with some topsoil around here. This will drain the water so that the post is always it's dry. Doesn't have the moisture stuck right to it. That's why I don't do them in concrete. Concrete's a quick way of doing it, and I mean, there's benefits to it. The concrete isn't going to move either, and it actually helps as an anchor on the post. Same as the styrofoam product that I mentioned to you. I think they're good alternatives. This is just the way that I've done them. I did fencing at the farm that it was there 30 years, and the posts just had gravel or whatever tamped around it. We never put them in with concrete, and they're still there in some of them. That's why I still believe that a bit of gravel around them, it's a little more labor, but I think the posts and that will last longer. And the reason for the crushed rock is the sharp edges of the aggregate dig into the post as you're tamping it and hold it. Helps hold it solid. So you get a yard or 2 of crushed rock dumped off from, say, Cumming and Dobie or Western Concrete or Wheat City or someone, and dump it in the driveway when you go to do it. And you take your wheelbarrow and dump one beside each post and tamp it in. That way then it's relatively solid. You've got a line of posts then now that are all like this. And if you got some that are a little taller, you take the line and you mark across it, take your square and go around the post. Skill saw at an angle and zip the tops of the posts off, so you've got a nice even line the full length of your yard. Then what I always say to people is measure what you want for the height of the fence, and you can get them made. If it's sheet metal, measure in about 3 spots. So if the panels progressively, the slope of your yard is this way, if they progressively get taller, you can run the fence so that what I put is the 2x6 on the top of here and hangs in slightly. So the sheet metal will fit in here. So you would have a line of them that goes here. And that's exactly how my property goes. Now, if you want to keep the top straight and just have the panels, you would measure, say, here to here, and there's a 4-inch gap there. So you would, sheet metal comes in 3-foot widths, so you would go 3, 6, 9. So you'd need 3 panels to do this. And then say this is 12 feet, you'd need 6 panels to get this distance. And you just progressively go 6 inches longer on each one to get that. Or you can step the top of these. You can take the top and go to the, say, 16-foot mark where you've straddled 2 posts, step down 6 inches, so that your top actually ends up at markers. Your top goes like this. Then you can go, say, a 5'6" panel or a 6 foot. Go 6 foot, 6 foot, 6 foot, 6 foot. Don't worry if you have to bury a little of it if it's sheet metal in the ground. If it's wood, you can put the bottom of the post on this way so that it goes with the slope, and then just cut them so that they'll end up like this all the way along. And when they're that close to the ground, once the grass is grown, you'll never see them if you're wanting to keep the wooden ones along there. Then the length of them can vary. That makes sense to everybody on that end of it? It's not as tough as a lot of people think to do a fence and that. It's more planning it out and making certain that you've ordered the proper materials. The cedar tones are quite common for fencing around the city here for your treated lumbers, but there are some that have used the green treated lumbers in the framework and then put cedar tone products on them. There isn't a lot of difference in them anymore. I found the cedar tone products are usually smoother. The green have more splinters and it's a coarser product. Green a lot of the time was used below grade to be buried below. Cedar tone is a little more aesthetically pleasing to the eye. Chain link is the other one that I'd mentioned to you for a fence. They're a little more forgiving because it can end up in the ground and never bothers. They just run the posts in, and most of the time you will see they will do those cast in concrete. It's quite quick to do it. J&M chain link actually have a driver though that they just hold the post, and it's like a post driver on the farm. It goes pump, 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 and it drives the posts in. We used to take a steel tube with 2 handles on it and a steel plate, and you'd stand the post up and just drive them by hand. They're not that hard to drive if you've got something like that. So you can do those type of fences yourself. Chain link also can be turned into a semi-private fence with inserts. You've probably seen a lot that have got the plastic inserts that slip down between the way the chainmail is, and they come colored. You can get them in whites, browns, grays. I don't know the full palette of colors, but they are available in many colors. Other types of fence like concrete, brick, stone aren't done a lot nowadays because they're very expensive to do. You'll see some done in panels, some done that they've actually put full brick or stonework. They've done some repair work at the corner of Rosser and between Princess and Rosser on 18th Street on the old stone fence that's done behind there. I think Heritage Brandon is it that's done a bunch of it, and there's placards on them. It's the oldest stone fence in the city, I'm told. At one time, that was 1 yard, and it was all closed in. Pardon?
It's a National Historic Site.
Yes. There's quite a few of the older stonework fences that used to be around the city years ago have all disappeared and been taken down or not taken care of and redone. So that's one of the last ones in the city that is being restored to its originals. I think it was a single family that had that whole piece, and it actually went across out onto 18th Street originally. And I think some of the cairns on the corner that have the Welcome to Brandon were some of the original stone from a portion of that fence. Driveways and sidewalks. Paving stones, concrete, asphalt, or just compacted gravel. Driveways and that have been done that way in city and around for many years. Replacing old sidewalks and such. A lot of sidewalks, you've probably noticed the grass has grown up around them and the sidewalk is lower than the grade around you. You end up walking on the grass because it's full of water every time it rains. Those problems can be corrected. What I've done on some applications is where the sidewalk runs, just dig along the side and put a 2x4 at the same height as your lawn along the side, and then pour right over top of that existing sidewalk. Bear in mind, you've got to go at least the 3.5 inches thick to do that, because if you try and put just a thin cap on top of an old sidewalk, every one of those old cracks and stuff that are in those old walks will come through the new sidewalk, unless it's thick enough. Predominantly, you should have the new sidewalks sit 1.5 to 2 inches above finished grade. So if your grass line, if your sidewalk is here, the grass should be midpoint on it roughly, and then it can grow up. That way, what happens is a lot of the time as you're cutting lawns and over the course of many winters, little bits of sediment and soil, grass as it breaks down becomes soil again. So eventually that overtakes the sidewalk and it builds it up. It's like most city boulevards, if you ever notice, the grass is up high enough that it's over onto the boulevards. They never started that way. Originally they were all, the dirt that was put in there in the grass was just below the height of those curbs and sidewalks. And it's just over many years of them. The sidewalks, for the most part, didn't go down. The landscaping around them came up. And it's just natural. That's how Mother Nature works, is the things. Everyone sees at the end of winter when the snow's gone that there's always a layer of dirt on everything. That's because every snowflake has a fleck of dust in it. And that's how most snowflakes starts. It's a fleck of dust that the moisture sticks to. That's why you've always got that dirty, grungy stuff after the snow's melted on your car, and there's always a little layer of dusty looking stuff on it. That's what it comes from. So you sit and think over the course of many, many winters, with the compacted soils, it will retain the moisture with grass clippings and all of that dirt on the top, and it starts to create a thatch in there, and it just keeps growing up until it comes above your walk. Driveways, how many people get hard surface driveways like concrete or asphalt? That's the norm of a lot of things now. Years ago it was just a gravel base a lot of the time. That's what's, most of them in my neighborhood, other than a few, are in the older areas of town. They were a gravel driveway that there was really no defined lines other than your sidewalks to the front of the house maybe off of it, or a sidewalk that ran parallel to it. They can be maintained by getting a little bit of A-base and building them back up if they happen to be washed out. It's not a lot of materials usually to fix something like that. Paving stones is another option that people have used around here. I found paving stones, a lot of the problems that were inherent with pavers is people didn't know how to prepare the base for a paving stone. Paving stone should have something like a base under it at least 6 inches thick. Paving stone should never be bedded in less or more than 3/4 of an inch of sand. Years ago, a lot of people used to just put this much sand in a driveway and start putting pavers down. They should never be put down in more than 3/4 of an inch, because the sand, as it rains and the vehicles go across the top of them, those where the tire tracks are packed down, and you'll see a lot of paving stone driveways that where the wheel tracks are, they're divots like this. They've been pressed down. Those can be repaired. You can pull the paving stones up and top sand off. What I used to do is just take a 2x4 screed, and you would compact your base, and then I would take a piece of just 3/4 inch conduit. So you would have your, say this was your base of the driveway was here, I would lay a conduit 3/4 inch here, and then broadcast the sand, and then just take a 2x4 and you screed across the top of it. So you end up with 2 lines from the screeds. And you just keep pulling these along, and then you would broadcast a little bit of sand on this little trench where the 2 conduits laid. Reach out with a 2x4 with just a flat piece on it, down, and just start setting your pavers, and then you would come back off of the driveway with that. If the driveway's settled out and that, take it out to where you're on the flat edge. So your base would do this, fill it back in, and then screed from here to here, so this is all the same height, and then you can replace the pavers if you wanted to do that. It's an easy way to repair them and that to where they look back to where they did the day they were installed. Asphalted driveways, you should put a sealer on them every so many years. You can buy it in 5-gallon pails, 20-liter pails to recoat driveways. Concrete driveways, there isn't much you can do with them. The only problems that surface here in concrete driveways is over time, top shales off because of the road salts that we drag in on vehicles and park them on the driveways. It's the hardest thing on sidewalks and driveways there is de-icers. You know, the blue pellets you get in a bag and pour on the floor. It deteriorates the top of the concrete. I'm not a proponent of using a lot of that. If I've ever used it and put it down, I usually, as it starts to soften up, I scrape it off rather than leave it on, because it's an acid. Acids break down concrete. That's why you'll see a lot of steps on fronts of houses. It's all exposed aggregate on the top because the finish is gone. And it's usually because somebody gets out there every day. Cat litter is a better thing to put on it than that. That way then it's natural, it'll break down. Most cat litters are made of clay-based products. They may be a little slippery the first day or so that it's on, but once the sun gets on it and that, it will eventually work its way through the ice. De-icers are a great product, but I have seen a lot of problems in the last few years with it. We had a concrete floor that was a new one in the fall, and somebody spilt a bag of it on it, and it destroyed 20 square feet of the floor because the finish went down that deep in it. You know, so it can be very, very corrosive.
So Dennis, my understanding is that if you have concrete, like we have a patio, that, and the top bit of it is all that
Gone.
stuff. Yeah. And my understanding was that patch concrete that you buy is not very.
It's not good enough to bind to it. A lot of the time, if you're going to try and patch a patio, ideally you want at least 1.5 to 1 inch of coverage of something on those sort of things. And I pour down a base of, it's called P-rock concrete. It's got nothing larger than your small fingernail. Most concrete is 3/4 aggregate. When you're trying to top an area like that, where it's mostly foot traffic and not going to be vehicles on, you can get away with like 1 inch to 1.5 inches. And I get it in P-rock because you can work it and the aggregate is smaller. It bites to the aggregate. When you go to put it down though, put a bit of the white Wellbond glue in a pail at about 3 or 4 to 1 proportion of water to, or say 4 times the water to the glue, and then put it down first and then put the concrete on it. It helps bind it to it. Prepping the surface for that, I would take a pressure washer, clean any of the loose aggregate off, make sure there's no big lumps or chunks that are stuck in places that are going to give you a problem, and then put a formwork up around it so that you're covering that much of it. And it can be fixed for that area. The types of things for steps and that are a little tougher to do. You've pretty much got to take and knock the top off of it and then reform the edges to pour over or replace the step, and that can be quite costly. You can get away with a topping mix on them. It's just the prep work for it. You've got to scarify or loosen the tops of it off and then get your height set for the formwork around the top and put it on. The formwork, what I used to do is just concrete drill into the sides of the step and fasten it, and then when you took it all off, you would just patch the holes with a little bit of expanding grout and just wet float it. Take a piece of styrofoam or a sponge float and just fill the holes, and it will get rid of it. Retaining walls and that. Anybody got properties in that are like this, and you're trying to maintain grade on the property? Okay.
Away from the foundation.
Or if you're trying, say the neighbor's lower than you or you're higher than one or the other.
I'm at the bottom of the general slope. From the whole neighbor. Everyone's neighborhood.
See,
I'm the party.
See, in our neighborhood, everyone's property kind of takes a 1-foot step down along the street. So what I did was put barrier curb on my driveway so that I could split the difference. A barrier curb's like you see on every street where the curb comes up. So the driveway actually sits 6 inches lower than my lawn. So I maintain the grade for my sidewalk and my driveway out to the street, but the actual landscaping is 6 inches higher. So there are ways of doing that. You can work with, years ago people used to use railway ties for landscaping. It's not a very environmentally friendly way. The treated materials nowadays will last for a lot of years. You drill them in, drill a hole, drive a piece of 20 mil rebar down, this far in the ground to anchor it. If you're going more than about 2 or 3 courses of those high, we used to do what's dead man them, where you have a course of them like this, and the next layer would be like this, and then the next layer you would go here, and this one, if you were looking down on the wall, this would be the wall. So this would be your low side, and this would be the side you're filling in. So you would get up, say, 2 or 3 courses, and you would put a piece in here that goes back 3 feet, or 4 feet, and then fasten a 2-foot piece here and drive a piece of rebar through this one and this one. This one would have a piece of rebar drove down into these. So when you bury this, it's like an anchor that's underground holding the wall. So, and they call that a dead man. So if you're going this high, you would want one mid-span roughly in that wall that would go back in, say 3-4 feet. So when you filled that with gravel or topsoil or whatever you were doing, you would compact it around and it would be laying back in under the ground like this, and this would hold the wall. So when you fill the dirt on it, this acts just like this, holding the wall. You'll see anyone that's done a lot of walls like this will put their dead mans and that in that way. Landscaping stones work on a different premise. They're always stepped, and they usually have a shoulder on them. So you would put your bottom course. This one has a lip that goes here, and the next one goes here. So every course is like this. You'll probably notice behind the Shoppers Mall, every course of those ones that go way up the hillside keep stepping back. That's how they work. So when the soil or whatever they're putting in as backfill goes against this, these two shoulders hold those stones from pushing forward. And as it keeps stepping back, it's like this. There's more strength in it this way than if it's like this. It can push it over. Whereas if it's lead back, it's harder for it to push over. The next one I'll touch on is your low voltage lighting. Many people interest in putting low voltage lighting in a yard. That's the little mood lighting you see at nights around gardens and such. It can be put in relatively inexpensively. You can buy the kits for it and you dig down about that far and you lay the wire through to wherever you're going, and the little lights fit in the ground and are wired that way. Some of them now with the batteries, and they use the sunlight for the solar ones, they are getting better and better all the time. You don't need the low voltage, but that is a type of low voltage lighting as well. The ones that are hardwired in and that probably will last you a lot longer. It's a little tougher for the kid in the neighborhood to pick them up and take away with them too. It's kind of like a leash, it stops after a bit. There's something that has their place. I like the look of them around gardens and such, and that gives you a bit of a feature look on things.
And how do they plug in?
Yeah, you can get them to where they plug into an outside outlet, or what I've used in different instances is I've got a plug on the house that has for Christmas lights that's switched inside, and you can run a wire from it to them. And the low volt, it just has a little low voltage transformer that steps the voltage down for the lights. I think there's quite a few different places that sell them, so there are many different variations of it. And depending on how many you want, and that, I think whatever size kit you would buy to do them and that. It's a nice way to dress up a yard. People come by at night or something and see, you know, this lighting at the lower areas and stuff. Underground sprinklers. Not something that most of us will be interested in. I probably don't have much need to go over much of that, but there are companies around town that do them. There's maintenance things that come along with them. That's why I didn't think there'd be too many people here interested in that. I won't waste too much time on that end of it then. The decks on things. Anytime you go to put a deck on your home, you should take a permit out. Lots of people say, I can save you a few bucks by not pulling a permit. Permit is what protects you as a homeowner if somebody ever gets hurt, or the deck falls off the house and kills someone or hurts somebody, and you didn't pull a permit and you didn't get the inspections on it, then you're the one that's liable. If it's been properly planned out, inspected by the city and a permit on it, it will be done properly. That's where I say lumberyards that do a lot of this will be able to do a deck plan for you. They will be able to give you the layout for the joists. You don't have to think to do it because they're already set up to do them within the legal parameters of what the building code and the city will require from you. If it's attached to your home, you will be required to put piers in. Piers are a concrete or steel twisted in, and they're usually put in below the frost line. Around Brandon, they're usually between 10 to 12 feet in the ground required. Frost line around here, most of the time is around 6 to 8 feet, depending on snow coverage. But it's not uncommon for frost to go down 6 feet. A permit will also let the city know for tax roll purposes. That's the other hook on that. It's not a good thing sometimes, but it's one of the necessary evils of here. The permit will also require a couple of inspections by the city. They will have an inspector come around and look at the deck, and they will tell you if there's something wrong with it that needs correcting. So if you've had somebody pull a permit and do the deck and the inspections weren't done, it's a way for you to use that as quality control if somebody has done it for you. So you can go to, say, a contractor who maybe wasn't quite up to par and he didn't do it properly, then that gives you the clout to say, okay, I'm not paying you the last of this deck until it passes a city inspection. So there again, it's another way to protect yourself. If you're doing it yourself and you've got those layouts from the lumberyard, you take that to go get your permit. That way you say, here's the layout of it, and it's all marked out, engineered. It tells you what the beam is going to be, if there's saddles required which go in the concrete to hold the posts that are going to hold your deck up. If there's adjusters, if it's fastened to the house, it'll tell them what joist hangers are going along the house. If there's a ledger, which is the board that goes attached to your house, it'll tell you how to attach that to the wall. If it's a freestanding deck, you can use those blocks with the adjusters, but it cannot be attached to your home. That way then the house and the deck can move separately of each other.
Is that a better way of doing it?
I like them attached personally, but I've done a lot of decks that people didn't want to drill the piers for them, or there was a reason the gas line or a sewer line or something came right there and they couldn't put it in, so we did the deck as a freestanding. Decks on a mobile home I usually do as a freestanding, because the mobile has a tendency to move up and down a little bit somewhat, right? Mobile with the temporary pads, because they will move together with each other as well. They'll have a tendency sometimes, if you're on land where there's a lot of moisture, the deck will physically start to pull itself apart from the movement.
Keep it on that. With an unattached deck, how close to the house can it get?
You can keep it within an inch of the wall. And I've done it where the actual board that goes against there, it touches the siding. So it's more just to allow it the chance that if it needs to float a bit, that it can. I always try and keep it down from doorways and that about this much, because it can, if it's free floating, lift enough that it would jam a door. But for the most part, if you keep it down, you know, that 2 to 3 inches.
So it's a little bit cheaper to do a freestanding?
Yes. Yeah, the freestanding one is always a little bit less. There's a trade-off to having them that way. What I usually use, it's a concrete block that is like this, and then I put a pad, like a patio stone or something underneath them. These have like a cross that goes in the center of them with a threaded rod that goes up here to a saddle, and you can put your 4x4 in here. This has an adjustment on it to raise up and down, and that's a benefit of a freestanding one. If your landscaping has a tendency to move a little bit on you and your deck is done one of these, you can crawl underneath and adjust one up a little bit and one down a little and level it again. That's the one major advantage of having a free floating like that. Those are things. Pardon? That's the reason that I say to do it that way. Some people have different thoughts on that, but you'll find for the most part, anyone that's been in the trades for a long period of time, and that will do things similar to this. Freestanding deck takes a little more thinking, a bracing and that, if you're higher. As you get higher, you'll want to have X bracing in the supports. If it's got concrete piers in it and that, it's solid, it can't move. And that's the one advantage of having it affixed to something. You've got a fixed point that doesn't move if it's on piers, and one that does.
Do you know how close to the property line a deck can go, like to a fence?
I usually want 3 feet of clearance to the property line. You can go a little closer if you want. City of Brandon's website is a good reference point. It will show you the layouts and what you need for clearance from property lines to the edges of things like a garage, your decks, and that. You can get variances if you need for that from the city. It has to be agreed to by your neighbors and that, and there is a cost associated to a variance. Note for everyone, what we've been working through right now is Leanna's talked about having the course run again in the fall. So what I've proposed to her is that anyone that has missed an evening, what we'll do is, your emails are on file with the girls, is once we get dates solidified on it and that, we would send you the schedule and that you could come in and pick up those nights. I told her I'm not too worried of having an extra person sit in for an evening or two to catch up on what you missed because of sickness and that, because I feel it's kind of a disservice to miss out on some of them. And I don't.
Gonna come, but I just on my couch.
No, and it's
For throwing up for 5 days.
life happens around us all. I mean, there's circumstances. I mean, I had my operation and had to have George come and second man the show with me. So I mean, things like that will come up in everybody's life. So that is what they're working with right now. Tentatively, we're looking at mid-August to start and run into the fall then. So if it works out for you, that we'll send you the schedule for it and you can pick the nights that you've missed, and you can maybe just let me know. That way I can make sure there's an extra chair or what have you here, and that the availability will be let to you to come and that to fill in those evenings. And like I say, it's not set in stone right now, but they're pretty close to securing corporate funding and not just the others. So we're going to look at opening it up for a few more people, and it will be outside of the catchment area as well. So because we've had so much interest from different people on it. They're going to change to a little bit of things on the income qualifications for it. We're going to look at opening it up on a little bit more in the higher end than that, but there'll be a rebate that we're looking at doing for anyone that falls into the lower areas and that, so that way it's not an exorbitant cost for anyone else, but anyone that can afford it will pay a slightly higher fee. So I just wanted to let you know that that will be coming as well, that we're working on that as well. The fences and decks, sidewalks, are all things that I said you should plan for. And like I said, if you've got where water's lying in that, you always want to keep in the back of your mind, you're looking for a 2% grade from your foundation out. It's not a lot, but it's enough that moisture will always run away. A lot of what I look for around a home, if you're doing, is if you've got downspouts that you have either tip-aways or a pipe or something that gets the moisture away from the home, you don't typically want the moisture dropped right at the downspout. If you put a splash pad in where it drops on a concrete splash pad and runs it a foot or two off, that's okay as well. A tip down is on the downspout. It's a metal piece that fastens on here and is roughly 3 foot in length. And when it's going to rain, you lay it down and it runs the water out 3 feet from your home.
You, like I got new eaves and downspouts and done, but I found that you just kind of, and that was it.
Yeah.
So I'm having a problem now with the water is coming and dropping there and it's running right down my nice little general slope to my walkway and making it a nice skating rink.
Yes.
So can you add those after?
The tip downs actually just screw on here. There's a metal flange. Most of the downspout and eave trough companies manufacture these and will carry them in their trailers. You can get them in various lengths. Most of them come, they're 3 foot to a meter long. So you're actually getting the water and that away from your home.
Can you buy them at like Home Depot or a lumberyard?
Yeah. The lumberyards maybe not, and I don't know if Home Depot does, but I do know Rainbow Eave Troughing, Able Eave Troughing, Brandon Eave Troughing. There's a few others around now, and they all manufacture these.
Okay. I bought this green thing that you can attach to it and then it kind of.
That's a good idea as well. There's many different versions of it. You can get an extra length of downspout and just put it on. The problem being with an extra length of downspout is sometimes if you don't make sure it's cleared all the time, it freezes in the evening and it'll swell the thing up and just bust it open. That's where the tip-aways, I find, it's open on the top, so it's just a U channel. It locks onto the pipe as it is and folds down.
So then you could just buy like just that from Able? Or
Yes, and they'll come and actually, because they'll actually come and install them. I think they're roughly $25. They're not that. They're not that pricey.
Yeah, extras.
And I always say if you can get the moisture away from your home, predominantly a lot of older homes have got a garden next to between the sidewalk and the house. And that's one of the hardest things to deal with sometimes because that's where the moisture has a tendency to lie. I always say in those instances, try and keep the flower bed side a little higher than the walkway so that if there's an awful lot of water, it doesn't pool there. If it's going to, then it would run out. And that's where if you've got your sidewalks are below the grading, it pools on your sidewalk, and you should try and correct the grading around it or raise the sidewalks. I'm not a big proponent of the flower bed between the walkway and I pour a wider walkway and the walkway's tight to the house.
Yes, and I got all the flower beds over the house, right?
Yep.
And it's just
It's awful to keep moisture out,
Yeah.
and you'll find a lot of the time they sink because of the moisture. The moisture settles them to the point, then all of a sudden you've got a puddle between your sidewalk and the house, and that water's leaching down along your foundation.
And I have like leaking tile, we put a leaking tile.
Yeah,
And so they will be fairly good, and then I got other renovations, and I guess just when the tram came down on the ground there it was.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it was like, why am I getting water there? I didn't have water there before, but it's because that grade went down. So you kind of fix that, and then, you know, next thing you know, it's good for a little bit, and then, oh, there's a downpour, and then you got more rain. Like it's,
ideally it's better off as grass than it is flowers sometimes, because the sod will actually retain it and won't compact down.
what was that, the grass?
Grass, like if it's kept as grass, it's a bit of a pain to cut in that. But what I always found is they're a foot wide usually, and it's terrible. I love the look, but the water problem is worse than the look. And that's why I always recommend, if I'm replacing those sidewalks at somebody's home and that, I'll say to them, if you want to put a flower bed in, put the new walks in tight to the wall and put a 1-foot flower bed on the outside as a border to your lawn. The contrast looks nicer. You pour the walk a little wider, so automatically you've got that water being 3 foot off, and if the flower bed is next to it, that'll absorb the water, and if you've edged along it, it will catch, and then your lawn takes it over, so it doesn't end up against the foundations. That's where the planning on anything on the exterior of your home is key. Plan it out, think about where that water's got to go and where it's likely going to go with what you do. Predominantly if you're going to put a deck on a home. What I do under a deck, so that it's not such a mess, is get heavy grade poly, lay it out and put crushed rock through the whole base of it. You can move the rock around and put your piers in or what have you first. Build your deck, and then any of the water that leaches through the deck doesn't lie under there. It doesn't soak up. If you've sloped it that 2% grade, the water runs out on the water on the poly to out towards your lawn is. It runs away from the home, so it doesn't end up being a catch-all for the moisture in that area. It's another one of those things. Think out what you're going to do a little bit before you do it. Projects like that are ones that many homeowners get themselves kind of painted into a corner because they didn't think it all out before they attacked it. And that's where, if you do the planning with your lumber supplier and you get an actual layout of the deck, you can tape it out with a tape measure and see, okay, well, maybe I miscalculated. I'm a little large, I can scale it down, or that's too small, maybe I can afford to go a little larger. So if you get a preliminary plan for it, it gives you the options that you can work with. And they can give you 1 or 2 of these quotations, and it gives you a breakdown of the materials and the costing for these projects. Those kinds of software are available online as well. There's lots of free calculators that you can use for it. Think in mind though, a lot of them come from the US. Building codes are different from the US to Canada, and that's where it works great as a preliminary planning thing for you. But if you're going to go to the lumber yards that are local or that for us here, the codes will be compliant with what's required here. Some of the things that are in the plantings and perennials and lawn care and stuff like that we'll touch up on at the green spot, and that's the final evening here. I think everyone got that email. The reason I kind of talk about it a little bit tonight is to put it back in your minds, to try and think of different things that you'd like to talk about out there. They're professionals who know what will work in what areas and that. I've got kind of a semi-green thumb. I play around with gardens and that of my own. Trial and error. That's all I've ever learned. This gives you a chance to talk to somebody who can help you design what you want. It's a good deal. For us tonight, most of the things that I've touched on have been things like how to get the proper grading from your home. 2% is industry standard for most part. If you're dealing with extreme issues of moisture, sometimes you've got to think about it differently. If you're running moisture off of your property, you don't want to run it onto the neighbors. If you're going between homes and that, say you've got a house here, and the property goes in here, where do you run that water? Ideally, you put a swale in between the two and run it to the low point out of the properties. So if you're between two homes, plan it with your neighbor. If there's a fence here that you're not having to deal with it, that's fine as well. But know for a fact you can't run the water onto the neighbors, so you may have to put a swale on your property to take the water away from your home, take it to the middle of what's allowed there, and take it out either to the back alley or to your front of the street.
That's what it's like the slope my neighbor has, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's called a swale.
And then we have the fence. The fence is joined.
Yes. I have a neighbor on one side, and that's what I did. I put a swale between the two of ours, and the fence goes right down the center of the swale. So any of the moisture from either of our properties runs to that and then out to the alley. It gets it away from your structure and theirs.
You'd be the best neighbor ever. No, I'm kidding.
Pardon me?
You'd be the best neighbor ever.
Well, arguing never settles anything in this world. So anytime that you can work some sort of cooperation with anybody, and that goes for more than just being neighbors. Anytime that you can work out some kind of cooperation with the other person, it's a lot more pleasurable in the end. The final outcome of the project is always that much better if you can work with your neighbor. There's nothing worse than, I'm not talking to you, and trying to settle a problem, because you're not going to be able to fix it 100%, or the answer may lie with him. You know, you may not be able to take the water all your way, but if you work with them and says, well, if we put the swale here and we can go off the edge of your driveway maybe at that point, it's because mine's higher, the water's run away from both of your homes and it's out, say, at the end of his driveway and then onto the street. The cooperation of the two of you is thinking the plan out to start with. Piece of paper and a pen, a tape measure, go around, kind of figure it out, and approach the neighbor. Say, this is what I'd like to do. A fence. A lot of homeowners, I don't think, ever think of going to their neighbor and asking if they'd be interested in splitting the cost of replacing that rickety garbage old fence.
So I have a question. Like, my fence is in between my neighbor and I painted the one side of my fence this last year.
Yeah.
Am I in charge of painting the other side, even though it's on her side of the property? Because we share the fence?
Ideally,
Because her chain link goes to my fence and then the other part of the fence we share.
yes. If it's conjoined and it's right on the property line, you look after your side, they look after their side, sort of thing. You can be a good neighbor and paint it. But know again, though, that if it's someone you get along with, just say, I freshened up my side of the fence and I've got some extra material. If you want to freshen your side up, or it's Saturday, I'm almost done, do you mind if I touch up this side of the fence? There again, if it's pleasing to you to see that the whole job is completed, is it worth fighting with a neighbor? Sometimes no. Sometimes you feel better inside. Okay, that was a pain in the backside, but it looks better now. So there again, it's your own pride of ownership. And that's where I may not get along sometimes with someone in places that I've lived, but I've always tried to find a way to work around it. And I have a rental on one side of me, and it comes with issues sometimes with renters. They may not be the best of tenants sometimes. You then work with the landlord. Don't fight with them. And that's the other angle. The landlord can be your best friend. They don't have to be. So each situation comes with a different playbook set of rules to play with. And that's where I always say, if you're arguing with a neighbor all the time, and I know from a previous class, I had a girl come and she was practically in tears. She'd bought a property that had a fence on it, but when she had the survey done, the neighbor's fence had spent years being 4 feet on her property. So she had 4 feet of property that was out there. So she paid to have the fence put 6 inches inside of her property. The neighbor come and pulled it down because they said it was their property, but she had the survey. I think there again, you get fighting over something where that's a point where you're, okay, if you're fighting with that person, when you bought the home, you have a lawyer involved, go through the lawyer then. Because those type of matters can fester into an awful situation. If you can't just approach the person and say, look, I found out through the survey that this is on my property or my property's over here. How can we settle this? Pardon? The city ended up involved with the deal, and they ended up going to court over it. She went to small claims court and won a claim against her neighbor for the total cost of the fence that was tore down. How do you live beside somebody after that? Well, it turned into, it was a nightmare. She settled it finally by paying for a complete privacy fence. It cost her like twice what it should have to ever deal with it. And there again, I think approaching the problem at a little different angle maybe at the start might have saved somebody a lot of headaches. And there's a lot of areas in this city where for years, you had the same neighbor for 25 years, and you might have been best of friends, and Joe put a shed at the back of his property as a place to tinker around on his lawnmowers and such. But it's 6 inches onto the neighbor's property. Once that's sold and the neighbor goes like me to put a fence in, and he does the survey, because to me that's the best money you can ever spend, is having someone come and actually put those pins in the ground or locate the ones that are there and tell you that is your property right there. It's not one of these things, well, I guess somewhere in here the old fence was here, so they told me that's where the property is. If you have an actual survey pin there and a piece of paper that states that's your property, then you've got grounds with the neighbor to plan it. If you're going to do it conjoined, where he splits the cost with you and you put up a good neighbor fence, both of yous win. If you're fighting about it and you have to sneak it 2 inches inside of your property, then it's what you want. Doesn't matter what if they're not willing to work with you on it. I always give them that option. Very rarely have I been turned down. I have a niece and nephew, the same thing. We approached the neighbors on either side, and the one guy was indifferent. Couldn't care less. We snuck in just a little bit. They weren't going to pay nothing, but the neighbor on the other side did, so we put it on the property line. So he lost 4 inches with the fence on one side. But he got what he wanted, a matching fence all the way around. There's nothing worse than a guy that wants short pickets on this side, or this guy wants a privacy fence. If you can come to some agreement,
That's
that,
what I have on one side, like I pick a fence and then the neighbor, guy might pick a fence that's here and they're changing fences right here.
yeah. And it happens. Human nature. You can't plan for human nature, and you can't fix problems sometimes. You sometimes have to find a fix that works for you. And if it's staying within your postage stamp of legally doing it, then so be it. Don't stress yourself over things that you can't fix. I think in our society today, we have enough stressors, and people have tendencies of making more out of things than they need be sometimes. If you can't come to a common resolution, find something that works for you.
Another thing to watch for is hydroponics. They are extremely expensive to move.
Yes.
We get people all the time in their office complaining because same thing, property valuation, everything else. What a hydro pole, because you need to keep somebody built their shed using a hydro pole, they move it, stop it, find yours, and a hydro pole is gonna cost them $15,000 to
Yes.
so your shed.
Utilities such as hydro and gas have all the chips are on their table, and you get one. You're betting against the house. The utilities and that have been put where they are, and to expect them to move something for you. And a prime example is a person I know went and got the permit, did that right, never got an inspection before he poured the concrete and built the garage. And hydro come to hook it up, and they're looking, and their hydro pole is this far from the eave of the garage. So they contacted the city. The city come down, and this person happened to build the garage 18 inches too far this way, so they were encroaching on the city's property. They had to take a diamond saw and cut that much off of the garage slab, lift the garage, pour the concrete on the other side, and then slide the whole garage over and fasten it down, because they didn't do their due diligence by contacting the city, making certain where their property line was. If you're going to build something that has an eave trough on it, so you've got like this where it's a 16-inch overhang, and you're to be 2 feet from the property line, not from the side of the building, from the edge of the eave. So if you sit and think and you look at that, and if you've got a side where the eave trough is, it's from the edge of the eave trough. So if you're looking at doing something like that, that's how it's determined. A lot of the old days, like on the property that mine, the neighbor's garage, the wall is right on the edge of the property. That wasn't uncommon in the old days because they weren't on the neighbor's property. But building codes changed over the years, and now you have to be offset. So anything you build should be inside of your property, and it should never encroach on the neighbors. There's on the City of Brandon's website, like I said earlier, those dimensions are outlined for different things, for fences, houses, anything that you're building, your decks and what have you. They will give you those dimensions. And at one time they used to have handouts at City Hall at Brandon Area Planning that you used to be able to pick up. And it's the same thing that's on their website, but it's a printed out little piece of it, and they're usually quite simple, informational. Gives you, say, for your deck or your fence, tells you what is required for the permit. So you can actually go down and say, okay, I'm going to do a deck, and I want to be within the legal limits of what I can do. You've opened that and it tells you what you need for the permit to do that. Or if you're going to build a garage, it will tell you up to X number of square foot, you don't need an engineer's stamp on a drawing for a garage. Anything over that, it's required an engineer's stamp. So there's many little hooks and indecisions that the average homeowner would never know about, and then go and do something and get themselves in trouble. That's why I always say pre-planning.
I owned a property in New Brunswick, and there was a new development, and completely fenced in, great, big deck and a pool. And when we went to sell it, the prospective buyers got a survey, which we didn't because we didn't. And as it turned out, the deck was 4 inches into a hydro easement.
Yes.
So we knocked down the price because we were in such a situation that we had to be gone within, we had to be at our new property shortly. And so we had to knock down the price because, you know, they're such a huge.
That's a good example of where it can affect your pocketbook, having something that's not done properly. At one time I did concrete work with a company, and we did all of Jacobson Griner's concrete work. We went into a brand new development that was on the back side of a development that had been done a few years earlier. And the first thing we do is go and locate property pins, which are the steel pins that are driven in for survey. Located all the pins, and I measured off of the one side, laid the house out, dug the basement, put the basement in. When they come to do the final survey on the property, the house was cocked funny on the property. And I said, we measured. And I went there with the surveyor, and we pulled down the one side, measured everything, and it was exactly where it's supposed to be. He went and got the survey map out, measured all the front pins, found the third pin on the back, and it was exactly where it was supposed to be. The fourth pin was moved over that far. And it just so happened that the neighbor that was there come out, and he's hanging over his fence looking like this, and I was digging around looking for that pin, and I'd found it. He says, I put that there. And I go, pardon me? He said, well, when I dug my fence in, that was my property pin. So he pulled it out and moved it over because it was in the way for the post. And he just pounded it in the ground in the wrong spot. Have your surveyor check your property. We laid lots out, sometimes 2 a day at that time. We were building 65, doing 60 or more foundations a year for J&G. And I can show you that house, and to me, I can look down there and all the houses are perfectly square. This puppy's sitting a little funny on the lot for some reason. So even professionals who do it every single day can run into anomalies that are out of their control. When I mentioned about hitting a gas line or hydro line when not calling for your clearances, we did development out in the West End. It was all brand new foundations. We got clearances for everything. We had a rain day and didn't go for a day. We went on a Saturday to drill the piers for a garage. So the basement foundation was in and nothing else. And then we had to drill the piers for a garage. Got there, and the one batter board, which is a set of 2x4s up with a nail that you pull the string lines on and you adjust them around to plumb down where your where your piers go. Somebody knocked the batter board down on one side. Didn't think anything of it. Put it back up, measured the lines, put the strings up, marked where the piers all went. First one we drilled down, we hit the gas line. The gas company, which is a utility company that comes to Brandon every so often and puts them in. It's not even a company from Brandon. We're in on the weekend. and ran the gas line in. They knocked the batter board down and run the gas line right down the line where we were drilling piers. Because we did not call, cost us $7,000. And there's nothing more frightening than drilling down into a hole and hearing a gas line going whoosh when you pull the bit out. Especially when my brother-in-law's standing there with a cigarette looking down to see what's... Because the reason it costs you so much is the gas company comes, the fire department comes, and the police come. So you're paying for the fire trucks, police, gas company, and all the extra hours for those people to come and repair that line. That wasn't your fault that it got put there, but you did not call. If we'd have called and got the gas company to come and locate it again for us, because those permits are only good for so long, and they'll state them on the permit. It doesn't cost you anything to get the locates. That's the stupid part about it on our aspect. But because we had the clearances and there was nothing there the day the guy did the clearances. But he'd have come, he'd have gone with his machine, and that new gas line would have showed up. We couldn't have drilled there then. Then it would be on the gas utility that put it in to come and dig that up and move it. They had to come and dig it and move it, but we had to pay for it to be shut off. And they had to actually dig it up because the rest of the neighborhood, they couldn't shut off that alone. So there again, call before you dig a hole in the ground.
So if I called like my old